Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Andy Littleton from Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm here with Eric Siepen from The Village in Tucson, Arizona, and we are here to talk to you about abuse of power.
Power.
And a lot more.
Yeah.
So, Eric, you had this topic on your list of topics, which everyone is about to hear, but explain the nuance of it briefly.
Oh, just simply kind of pondering the idea of abuse of power in an upside-down way, how congregations might be abusive to pastors.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think
you'll find out when you listen why we...
and I will just say that it ends up in really, I think, a very practical way that could apply to almost anyone listening. So how do you go about deciding where you should go to church?
Yeah.
Like very practical, I think, great conversation in that direction.
Yeah.
in the heart of this one.
So if you want to hear two pastors talk, and I know we preface this a lot, and we preface it in the actual conversation today, but we are not speaking for Mission or for The Village, and for the most part not referring to Mission or The Village when talking about spiritual abuse or anything like that. So we want to make sure you understand that when we are talking about it.
And we don't come to you today as two prepared lecturers making a NPR-style podcast that is edited out and worked out. The premise of this podcast is two pastors sit down for breakfast and have an open conversation with each other, free form. There's an empty seat at the table. You get to sit and listen in. So that is what it is. Take it as such and enjoy the ride. Well, I just gave you the intro you wanted, but not on the air.
You did give me the intro. So you know what's been different about 2024 is I actually have show notes every single week.
Oh, yeah. And the best thing about these show notes is the picture on the back. So this is going to be our photo for the podcast. You got to look like you're reading it. This is looking really fake. And it is fake. Everything's fake.
Okay.
So now we're going.
All right. Now we're going. So let's start with the funniest thing. Here we go. What food should I avoid?
Vegetables.
All right.
Yep.
Any particular kind of vegetable that I should avoid?
Oh, absolutely. The nice dark leafy ones. Yeah.
All dark leafy vegetables. Okay. Yep. Worst advice you've ever been given?
Yeah, okay. That's going to take some thought. I've gotten so much bad advice.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Here you go. Weird Andy food combinations.
Oh, yeah, all of them. I am a food mixer.
So like, what's your favorite go-to food mixer that people are like, oh man?
I don't even know, man. I it's just every meal. I like flavor combinations. I don't know. I don't. You'd have to ask somebody else.
Here's a funny one.
They're normal to me.
My dad. He used to do these big glasses of iced tea. And his three sons would just come by and grab his glass and just drink it.
Gross.
And he got so upset about it. And he doesn't really remember this, but we all remember it. He would put milk in his tea, like iced tea.
This is just kind of
and
British.
Then he would put some kind of weird, lemony thing like that. So, lemon and milk and tea is like you can get your milk to curdle a little bit.
Oh, that's gross. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's trying to gross us out. So there's a weird food combination.
Yeah, that's weird.
All right.
I mean, I like things that taste good together. I'm not trying to.
Well, some people think they like ketchup on their eggs. Other people don't like ketchup. Some people want a particular kind of hot sauce on their burrito, and other hot sauces are a violation. Like you don't put salsa on your burrito, you put hot sauce, like those kinds of things.
I don't care.
Okay,
I'll do it. I can do either one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hard-boiled eggs and salad. No, thank you. All right.
Absolutely. It's delicious.
All right. Here we go. There's a lot of talk about spiritual abuse, right? And mostly from leadership to congregation.
Yeah.
But I think it would be interesting to explore the spiritual abuse that congregations put on pastors.
Well, that's probably the most faith over breakfast interesting one right there.
So far, all right. What's the role of prayer in your life, Andy?
Yeah, that's a ever shifting and changing thing for me.
Which would be an interesting conversation.
That would be an interesting conversation.
All right. How do you read the Bible, Andy and Eric? And can you help me?
Oh, can we help you?
Read the Bible. Yes.
That worries me. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding.
Those were the subjects that I wrote down for today.
Okay.
No.
I mean, I think we should do the spiritual abuse one, and then we could throw in the worst advice if I happen to think of it.
All right.
Between now and then. Okay.
All right.
So you're feeling abused by your church, Eric. That's what I'm hearing.
No, I just am kind of surprised. Like, it's a big thing right now. If you read in pop culture and even in Christian culture, like the abuse of power, right? People abusing their power. This is a conversation we're having a lot.
Yeah.
But in a congregation, there's a unique power thing happening. Certainly within staffs and in org structures, there can be abuse of power. But congregations themselves have power.
The assumption culturally is that power is primarily held by a person, usually male, but not always.
Right.
In a high responsibility position.
Yes.
So that's the way the power dynamics are often framed. Would you say that's accurate? This is off the cuff, as Faith Over Breakfast is, but I'd say that's the...
Sure.
So if you were to really do a deep dive study on just like power, what is it? I think you'd find a lot of ways that power can come, right?
Sure.
It can come through, people who are in authority positions probably feel that there's a lot of power from all of the forces outside that, expect things of them or, force them into a mold. And then there's the power of a populace who's unhappy. So speaking of sports, which you kind of wanted to talk about jokingly before we got on here.
Well, I just wanted to talk about the Browns.
Yeah. But so, the University of Arizona loses a game to Oregon State, which is shocking.
You were depressed. Maybe we should process that a little bit.
No, we really shouldn't. But but you look on social media in the morning, and what is it? Everybody fire the coach. Two or three players, leave, get out of here. There's a power in being, in the eye of the mass of critics, and you have to think like actually that coach's job does end up in jeopardy the more people, scream and say stuff on social media because there's the power that money can bring. How often do we hear about the unseen people who try to stay totally anonymous, but wield power even over influential people? There's anyway, you could. So my point is the way it's talked about in culture, typically, I think coming out of academia, is you look to the top, to the person that's running things. They have power. There's a deep distrust there, or look at the system. The system just creates this imbalance of power.
Yes.
So that's how it usually comes out of academia, and I don't think that's all wrong.
Right.
I think that's a response to things, but I'm not sure that's the whole picture. I don't think anybody really studying this would say that it is the whole picture.
No, and I think I'm trying to engage in a pop culture level. I mean, my collegiate background is in all of this, so I don't. But I'm not trying to have that conversation because I just think it's interesting in the dialogue. I agree with all the things that we're really focusing on the failure of people and what they've done. And I think we have this underlying cultural narrative of that all of us somehow are traumatized and all of us are.
Well, it's advantageous in. The reason I bring up the academia stuff is we are borrowing that language.
Sure.
We really are.
Yeah.
A lot of times without understanding the journey by which we got here and where that language is coming from and how those assumptions were formed often. That's right. So that's why I bring that up, is just to acknowledge that. But But yeah, in pop culture or in our everyday lives, there are assumptions about how these things
right. And I guess part of it was, I think there's a lot of instruction, and I think it's really good because I do think we are seeing sort of the consequences of giving so much power to individuals.
Agreed.
But at the same time, like the teaching of warning signs, things you should look for, ways you should stand up for yourself, I think should be offered to people whose main calling as pastors is to serve people. Uh-huh. And so those people themselves can take advantage of you and can be abusive to you. And I'm actually, I just need to say this as a disclaimer, I'm not actually talking about the Village. I think the Village is relatively kind to me. Yeah. But I do see this happen a lot where pastors, and I've experienced it at times, are not considered. And they're seen as the person with the power when a lot of times they aren't the person with the power. So
dialing it into churches, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say one more thing. I think a lot of us know this in our culture, but it's become advantageous. There's almost a flurry of attempting to become viewed as the powerless one in the culture because that's the more innocent position. And so you'll see on the left and the right. So the response of the right to the left talking about power is to say, no, we're the ones without power. We're the ones that have had all of our power stripped away. And I've even seen this in like higher up denominational spaces where people are like, well, I'm being unthoughtful and mean because my group's been out of power for so long. And that's often people who the other group would say, no, you've been in power. Right, so there's this argument back and forth.
Into power.
So it's most advantageous to have less power, except the thing being accomplished is to get more power for yourself or your group. And so good cultural commentators have said, well, this whole line of thought doesn't work very well because once you gain the power, you're now in the position that's disadvantageous to you. Don't you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think, I hear that conversation all the time.
Yeah.
It's distressing. I think this maybe links back to last week's podcast and just how we were having a little bit of conversation about celebrity pastors.
Yeah.
Maybe they're slightly careless with their words.
Right.
And words have power. And I think words are the cultural power. And I mean, that's how we communicate. Yeah. That's how we establish things. That's how we manipulate and do all that kind of stuff. And I think if I have an admonition to celebrity pastors, I have an admonition to local congregations that they are careful with their words, because I actually don't think they understand how powerful those words are.
Some people don't, some do. Depends on.
Well, they may actually understand how powerful they are, and they wield them.
That's right. So anyway, so acknowledging, and I also am very grateful for mission. I'm not walking around feeling like. I mean, granted, my church is hard on me.
It's not that the Village or Mission isn't sinful and hasn't been,
all that acknowledged.
Yeah, it's just they're not particularly spiritually abusive places to pastor.
No, I've found Mission to be one of the. I personally think it's one of the best places in the world.
Well, I hope you do. I mean, that's a good thing.
Well, a lot of pastors. Let's be honest. A lot of pastors don't feel that way about their church. Yeah. A lot of pastors
they don't
are dealing with, they're enduring it.
Right.
I love our church. It's where I want to be. And, and not just because I started it, I genuinely enjoy it. So, but that said, so how do you see this work out in churches? What brought this to your mind?
Well, to be brutally honest with you, the Allender Center I haven't listened to their second podcast, but the first podcast was on spiritual abuse. So I was just listening to that and kind of processing what they said. And to be honest, some of it was slightly agitating to me, because I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. Like, we become so focused on what feels abusive and what is abusive. And I need to be very careful here, because I understand and have engaged with people who have been abused by power. So I'm not.
Same.
I'm just very concerned about the conversation we're having around it. And I think then the other conversation that got me really thinking about this is that I was listening to a very famous trauma counselor who developed the community resiliency model. and she was saying she has moved away from the word trigger because of the dynamic it creates for people who are triggered. Like it's actually an abusive word, and I have been triggered. It's a power word, right? Because now you have been placed. You triggered me. You are now in the actual. I'm in the power seat, and you're in. In the
which tends to happen with all these terms as time goes on.
Sure. And so we have to be, language is so important. And I think like part of this, I guess, so the thing I've been processing a lot is that I am a pastor of a church that volunteers to come to church, right? They volunteer to be under me. And they're in a place of and not just me, other elders, leaders, like, what does it mean to submit to one another? What does it mean to live out a life together in the local body while we're getting all these messages? And one of the big ones right now is spiritual abuse.
Well, let's just work out what you just said, because
you like working out what I said.
They volunteered to be under me. Now, I could see somebody in their soul going, I don't see it that way. Like the Village is just a kind of a great community I like to be in. Like I don't view Eric as being like the Lord over it, and he's but no, wait a second.
No, and I wasn't saying that. Yeah.
No, I know it. I know.
Yep.
Here's where I'm going with that. To say that, but the truth is, like, those who do understand the way the Village works, or the way any place works, is that a culture of mutual care, but also mutual like honesty and like discipleship that's willing to ask the hard question, but to shoot for the good, even if it's painful. Like, that is one that's under your watch care, that you have in many ways created that. And so there is an understanding, I think, around here that there is, and you guys talk about like submission and in a way that leads to creating the right kind of places for people to be discipled and to actually engage with God. And so there's no place you go where you're not under somebody. Yeah. And I mean, even if you isolate yourself in your house and you play video games all the time, you are still you're under somebody's the landlord. Maybe your parent lives there. Yeah. Or even if you get rid of all those layers, you're still under you and your management. Yeah. And if your own management is not good and healthy, you will not thrive and flourish there.
Sure.
So we're always looking for, I think we're always looking for not how do we get away from power. I think we're always on the hunt for where's the safe power.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That actually has my best interests in mind.
Right. And I think there's a dilemma there, because I think if you look at the New Testament, well, you could just say if you look at the whole Bible, but as the New Testament kind of lays out the church, and Paul begins to structure it for us. Excuse me. Right. One of the things that I notice is that it is so counter. I mean, it's counter to the culture it appears in, but it's counter to my own culture. The idea of allowing someone to guide me and caring for that person is very contradictory. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm my own self. I guess partly I think sometimes my encouragement, and the thing I'm kind of trying to process, is that I think congregations need to think less about what is this church doing for me, and more about how am I caring for the people who are trying to lead me into the Great Commission to make disciples. Like, how do I help make this easier, as Hebrews?
Ask not what your church can do for you, right, but what you can do for God's kingdom.
And I don't even know so much about it being, but I think that's what we hear as Christians is, so what you're saying is, you're asking me to do stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm actually saying, I'm wondering if you could think a little deeper about how you care for and really think about the people who are trying desperately to lead you to the throne of Jesus.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And maybe that actually could lead us, we don't need to spend a long time on that. Maybe it could lead us into prayer and reading scripture and the worst advice you've ever gotten. But
yeah. I mean, I think this is interesting. So give me, let's try to come up with something of an example, but not one.
Sure.
I'm not saying like draw out a story from a friend here in Tucson or your own
well,
life.
I can draw it out from past church experiences.
Yeah.
That I'll
Okay.
have a few
So how might this actually play out?
A couple of ways. I think. Well, here's one. Just that. Well, let's talk about power of congregation. So I was in a congregational church.
Yes.
So
I have been in one of those too, where it felt like the pastor couldn't get anything done.
Right. And votes are what determine things. And so there are all these sub-power structures built into the church.
And the family that's been there forever. The loudest person in the room.
And the biggest giver.
Yes.
All have power. So when votes come up, they're the ones swaying people. And so the poor pastor is left at the whim. And that's actually abusive to be left at the whim of your congregation.
Yeah.
Think
about this. You're told you're a leader, but you can't lead unless you're doing what other people want.
Right.
Yeah. That's manipulative.
Yeah. That's very difficult to live with. I think the other one is that, and this is actually as churches get larger. This is because when your churches say like 35 people, if I go up to you and I say, man, Andy, that sermon sucked.
Yeah.
And I don't actually think you prepare very well. Mm-hmm. That actually has a ripple effect on almost all 30 people.
Yeah.
And it probably will either be dealt with or, because we're a family. It's a family structure there.
We're going to have this whole internal conversation about, is that how everybody really feels?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you all feeling the effects of this?
Yeah. As it gets bigger and bigger, people feel more free to say things without any consequence.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes what you say to pastors, you don't realize how much of an impact that has on them. Right? Because maybe you're thinking, yeah, I know Andy, and I can say, even if it's not something that's a direct criticism, I just need to say this one thing, so Andy should, because I know Andy will think about that. I know Andy. I mean, I would do this, because I knew the pastors in a lot of churches that I was in. I'd be like, oh man, I just think that Andy needs to think about this one thing when he was preaching. Okay, well, if there are 700 of us, that means that like 10% of us thought that, and 10% of us are going to go talk to.
Well, yeah,
right, or even so, instead of one person, poor Andy hears from 8 or 9 persons that day. And that's a lot for a pastor to carry.
Right.
Even if it's not always like a direct thing, it's just I need to offer you a careful correction, or, hey, did you notice your son was off campus during the sermon? Right.
Yeah, that kind of stuff happens.
So just these words, I have power.
I'm concerned about your wife.
Yes.
And you're like, who all's thinking this or whatever?
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of the language, because you're usually the speaking pastor in particular, but this happens for all the pastors. They're the touch points for the congregation on a Sunday.
Yeah. Especially
in a community where there's not a lot of communal engagement.
Yeah.
So that's one way I would see that,
It's interesting because the very reason I did not want to be a pastor is around this. So when but it's because of my own issues. So when I was a youth worker, I was involved enough in the church that I knew all the internal conversations, but I didn't really have a say in anything. And I remember having a lot of different thoughts about how the pastors ought to do things, and would sometimes share those, usually not, but just kind of going, I wish they would talk like this. Like if they want to see younger people in the room, they need to talk to them, even if they don't, see their faces, or else they're never going to really engage. And I wish they would listen to cast things a little differently, the way that we're suggesting. Anyway, I had all these critiques, and it started to dawn on me later that was because of the position, that whoever's at the top, quote unquote, is the one who I'm going to blame for this stuff, because they have the power to change it, at least in the church structure I was in. And I was in a congregational one at another time and felt like the pastor couldn't get anything done. So, but then all of a sudden, when the possibility started to emerge that, I could lead a church, my immediate thought was, I don't want to do that, because then I'm in that position, and then every one of my things I do gets scrutinized. And I remember I just kind of going, no, that's not what I want to do. And I remember driving down Speedway Boulevard, and I saw a billboard of a church with a big picture of the pastor on it.
The cool
And
church?
it wasn't. It actually wasn't.
Wow.
It wasn't one I'd heard of. But I just remember thinking, you idiot. Why would you put yourself up on that billboard? Don't you know how many people can tear you down?
Interesting.
So it was like a fear that I had
Sure.
to eventually face. And I remember one time in my mind, I always thought Tim Keller was so measured and just he was, had become kind of a prototype for me, where I was like, I'd like to speak in an informed way, kind of like this. And I remember looking at some article or something, and just the hundreds of comments just ripping him to shreds. Just, see, this is liberal garbage and all this stuff underneath it. And it dawned on me, I thought, the pastor who I can point to publicly and say I think is one of the most measured, kind, generous, he gets ripped to there's no way of doing this without enduring criticism. There's just no path. And I felt like I had to accept it. Like, God, will I follow you if people criticize me or not? That I felt like a crossroads question for me. But anyway, it was very much something that I grappled with, going like, oh, it felt like this is walking into a den of lions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know that it's been that bad, but I'm not done yet, and it hasn't been easy. Yeah.
Sure.
There's been plenty of criticism.
Being a pastor is hard, and critique is part of the deal.
And there's a part of me that, for me, I had to swallow that pill, right?
Yeah.
And say, God, this seems to come with the territory. And if we don't lead people toward your kingdom just because we're afraid of this, like, that's not good.
Yeah.
I can't succumb to that fear, right? Like, what's the alternative? I go off and do something I feel you haven't called me to do. But then there's the other side of, like, what's the responsibility of those on the other side of that? And that's what you're bringing up.
Well, yeah. And I think, and maybe this is just the world that I walk in, but I think it's not. I look at all the books that I read. I look at all the books that my congregation reads. I look at all the things that are being said in all the different spaces, and very few of them are giving concrete biblical exhortations, explanations, and directives to congregations on how to follow their leaders, how to care for their leaders, how to lift up their leaders, how to be good people.
Most of the stuff out there is how to get away from bad leaders.
Yes. Yeah, it's
right.
So much so.
That market's saturated.
Yeah.
At this point.
And I don't think
culture.
Historically caring for your pastor is a popular big selling book, right? You can't, right? It's not a popular teaching.
It doesn't well, it has no appeal.
Right.
I know, no, it is, right? Like,
no, I agree with
nor
you.
is it caring for your senators.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever seen a book that says how to care for your senator, how to care for the judges in your community?
Well, it's just terrible.
How would you care for the superintendents of your school system? No. Not
a big popular thing. No, this is probably not going to be a popular podcast. We'll have to title it something else so that people will listen.
Yeah.
But I think it's important because I think I've learned about discipleship, and it's really uncomfortable as someone who leads and disciples, and I'm not great at it. And I think villagers listening to this are going to say, yeah, you don't do this well, is teaching people to take care of me. Like, the first step to discipleship is to teach someone to take care of me.
That's so funny because that, as you often do, Eric, that's one of those things where I'm like, my immediate reaction is like, no, it's not. So,
yeah.
So how is that the case? How would that be the case?
Because, and I don't think this is true for all time periods, but in this particular time period, it is a very egocentric thing. And part of discipleship is breaking egocentrism. And usually what people see is, what do you give me? That's what do I get? And then there's an exchange process. If I value what I get from you, I will give you whatever level I value that at.
Right.
And I, instead of thinking, I was taught, like, the first real mentor that I had as a pastor or becoming a pastor, I went to him and I said, I will do X, Y, and Z. Like, I will pour my life out for you if you'll just offer me what you have. I think that's what all disciples are called to do, like as followers of Jesus. I don't think necessarily you're supposed to swear your life to someone.
Right.
But I think it would change leadership if 20 people at Mission came to you and John and the elders and said, we will, what do you need from us? Not as like a church building and people, like you as leaders in your personal lives, in your homes, and in this church. Like, how can we pour our life out for you if you'll pour into us? I think that would, that's, it'd be mind blowing.
Yeah.
You would change your church.
Sure.
Because you would be able to rest into those people.
Yeah.
And you would be excited about teaching them. And it's not that there isn't elements of that already at Mission.
Right.
Right. Or at the Village. But it's not necessarily the way people think.
Right.
And so part of discipleship is helping people think that way, which is why you, in a sense, have to be willing to pour yourself out.
So explain. So as I think about it, I'm like, this is just not how we behave in any. So like you go, I don't know, you join a gym.
Yeah.
And somebody owns the gym.
Yeah.
The thought is not like, how do I pour into this person who owns the gym? The thought is that the role of that person in owning a gym is to provide a service for me. I will consume it if it's worthwhile. Right. If not, I will take my business elsewhere. So how is church different than that? Like, I think people view them as the same.
I agree.
Yeah. So work work that out. Like how would a person and why would they think of the church differently than the gym?
Well, the gym first is not based on the creator of the universe, so we can start there.
I agree. Yeah.
It's not a community of people who follow the Savior of the world. So there's, but with that in mind, so that already just gives this whole space that we're in this amazing and awesome kind of weight that a gym does not have.
Well, I think a core question, it's been a little bit since I've talked about this, but I have talked about this at Mission, is we think of the church as a place that we choose like a gym. But if we really believe in the God that we're talking about here, then God actually would have said, I have found you, and I want you to walk with these people. Like this is now. There's a danger on the other side. So as a leader, if I pronounce that over somebody, like that can move in the direction of a controlling cult. Yeah. Right. So I'm not trying to say that the leader's role is to say, I know God has called you here, and you're here to submit to me. I'm saying that like internally, as we say you become a Christian or you're a Christian that moves to a new town, you should prayerfully be asking, God, who do you want me to follow you with? Which one of these communities is the one that you would like me to be walking with? And I think that as we really go through that kind of process, there's a certain point where, we can trust that God does that.
Hello, Zerk.
I love that what just happened with Eric as we come back on the air was he was so sure this was a very important phone call, and it was indeed a spam likely.
Yeah, it was a spam likely, but I am waiting for our roofers to call, so I apologize. This won't even, maybe I'll leave it. I don't know.
Maybe Slaves to Technology is our next podcast.
Put some music under it.
Yeah.
Anyway, can you repeat what you said?
Knowing me, probably not. But I essentially saying that if you're coming to town or you become a new Christian and you're really just saying, God,
right,
who am I to follow you with?
Right.
And you're seeking that, and you're prayerfully examining that. You're not going around like a gym. You're not going, which one provides the services that I need? So I would be asking, like, through whom did I come to see Jesus? Where are the kind of these gospel ideals being carried to me? Through whom are they coming to me? Because often people, I've noticed this happen a lot of times. Somebody will become, they'll have a person who really invests in their life and shows them Jesus.
Right.
And then they go out on a kind of church shopping adventure that's like not tied to that person that brought them to Jesus. Like probably the ideal would be to keep walking with that person in the community they're in.
Yeah.
But the why we don't do that is even the person walking with them is highly likely to say, now you go find a good church that works for you, that has the music you like, that communicates in a style that you like. You know, we're always framing it like that's how you should go choose, versus saying, where is God doing the work in you? Whatever the music sounds like, or if they meet in a building or not, like,
right,
walk there. And I think if we were thinking that way, that would change the dynamic immediately.
Right.
Because it would be the work of God is what led me to these people, versus, this is the ultimate church that does all the cool things.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have seen, and this is when it comes to discipling people, and I see this, and I see it at the Village, and I see it everywhere in Christian community, and that is what I would call a non-biblical Pauline theology. And that means I'm like Paul, that I go to bed, I have a dream, and I'm called to go here, and I'm called to do that. It's like me and God calling me, and God calls me outside of everything else. And so there's not an accountability to the larger community. And that doesn't mean like God doesn't call you somewhere.
No.
Usually I think the call does originate with you, or if you're in community, it kind of bubbles up out of that.
Yeah.
But there's still an accountability of like, it's not God has called me to do this, and so I must do X, whatever it is. It's I feel like God is calling me this way. Do you hear that?
Right.
What do you think? Would you listen with me? Would you pray over this with me? And let's all be at peace with whatever we're being invited to do.
And then, I've seen, this is a story I've seen actually play out a number of times in our community due to the ages that are there. So somebody will be on that journey, and let's say they move to town, 20-something, single, they try a couple churches, they come into mission, and they go, you know what, they were really welcoming to me. Something about the way that they were talking about things felt like God was kind of there and speaking to me. And I think this might be the church I really should ground myself in. So they do for a period of time. And then at some point they realize, I really want a girlfriend or a boyfriend. And they look around and they go, oh, the eligible pool here is pretty low.
Right, because it's a smaller church.
And start thinking, actually...
Christ Community.
Right, one of the bigger churches that has a lot of singles or something like that. And then you go there, because of that service, that...
sure, it's bigger.
Yeah, and I've heard several times the phrase like, I really think mission's like the better church for me, but there aren't any girls here, and so therefore, that you could do that with, you could put music in there, you could put the time of the service in there, you could put a million different things, right, as the factor. So is that a good way to think about this, or how does that lend toward taking care of leaders and a call to be in a community? I tend to think that's the exact opposite. I think you should go, where is God calling me to follow Jesus, and then lift up to God your longing to meet someone, and hope and believe that through that, or your work, or whatever, grocery store you stumble into to pick up your leafy vegetables, that God will,
your dark green ones, especially
that God will work, and if you need a girlfriend, he'll
get you one.
He'll get you one.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big question is, and I think the part of discipleship and caring for the leaders around you is really to just ask, like, what does dependency look like for me? What would it look like to say, Andy, John, the elders, they're the people that God has put over me in this moment, and so I'm going to depend on them. I'm going to depend on them in all these different areas of my life. And they're not perfect, and they're going to hurt me, and I'm probably going to say some inappropriate things to them or do some things I shouldn't be doing. But I'm going to depend on them. And I think we're taught that we only depend on ourselves because other people aren't dependable. And it turns out that they're also abusive, which is true. And we're seeing that all over the place. And so why would I depend on someone who could abuse me?
Well, and the where is God in it question is core to me.
Yeah. And I always talk about like if you're here, like at the village or at mission, but if you're here, like God has drawn the boundaries for this moment around you. This is your space. You should own it. In the sense of you should take it and offer yourself and take what it's offering and become part.
Yeah.
And don't leave it lightly. Doesn't mean you don't leave. It just means do it with care.
Yeah.
Because it's hard for those who labor, right?
Yeah.
It is always hard. So I don't know. I think we started this off in the beginning with like, well, what congregations can be abusive. And I think that's, to me, I think one of the things that as a pastor you should look out for is how your congregation uses its words to engage you.
Right.
And really like keep track of it in a sense of like, am I being encouraged in this community? Do they speak to me in ways that encourage me, or do they speak to me in ways that I'm just like, every day I'm going home to my wife saying, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Like so-and-so said this, or, you know, that's an abuse. It's an abusive congregation if you're going home multiple times a week saying, man, this is hurtful. Man, these people don't, you know, they're mean.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's a form of spiritual abuse.
There you go.
So
all comes back to spiritual abuse. Speaking of spiritual abuse, Eric, before we get off, what's the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh, man, the worst piece of advice that I have ever been given. Man, I did not think about it because I was asking you. You know, this is odd. I don't know if it's the worst advice, and I don't mean to throw my parents under the bus, but when I entered into college, I so wanted to be a sociologist. Yeah. And I was so excited. And I don't know if my parents actually said this directly, but the message I got was, that's not, sociology is a field where you can't make any money, you can't support a family. And so you either have to be like an engineer or a scientist or a teacher. These are guaranteed jobs that you can, you know, in fields that are always growing. And so, but those weren't I tried all three of them. They weren't my field. They weren't the thing that got me excited. And I never did fully return to sociology. So that's I don't know if it was the worst advice I ever got. But it was a hard moment to get a little deeper than just, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. How about you?
I think mine comes from my dad, and it was, he very clearly said a couple times, don't be like me. Go out and do something with your life. And what he fundamentally misunderstood was, you know, the being versus doing. I kind of rebelled against that in, you know, what he meant was go to school and get a degree. Part of why I didn't go to school and get a degree was I was like, I don't like that advice. And so rather than go to school to not be like dad, I didn't go. This was when I was, you know, thinking about college in the very first place. And, he misunderstood that what I needed from him was I needed to glean identity from him, not just a series of choices.
Right.
Yeah. So that was one of the probably worst pieces of advice.
Yeah.
I ever got.
Wow. All right. Well, we kind of we went a little bit more serious than I had intended. You know.
Well, you know, just a place to land the plane.
Yeah.
So, hey, thanks for tuning in to Faith Over Breakfast, everybody. And we encourage you to rate us on Apple, Spotify, Google, anywhere you can rate. If you have a question, an angry comment, if you'd like to accuse Eric of some form of abuse,
please don't.
Please don't. And no,
don't email.
But if you have a topic that you would like to have us discuss, faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com.
We are really longing for the emails.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we've had a flood of them. So.
You know how we would feel cared for?
Yeah.
Send us an email.
Especially if you go to Mission Church.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, you know, listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
If you go to Mission Church. That's
well, I think if they heard this part, I guess they're listening.
Yeah. If you made it this far, you're committed. Hi, Brian. Yeah.
We love you, Brian. All right.
Love you, Brian.
Ask us a question. All right. I think that's it. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.